Well, this is the 99th time we are introducing you to an episode of The Smoke-Filled Room. 2 years of doing this. For those, I know a few people who've been with us since the beginning. You've been listening to our voices for 2 years and probably should have your mental health checked. But thank you for being with us. As we approach our 100th episode next week, we've got a pretty special episode planned next week, so you don't want to miss it, as we have the great debate between the various segments of the Republican Party, trying to see if we can find some common ground so we can start to work together. But there's so much in the news that we've got to pack it all in this week. So we've got experts with us this week that can help us get through everything going on in the world of Illinois politics. Let me do some introductions here. We have Don Tracy, who's the former chairman of the Illinois Republican Party and an attorney. Don, glad that you're here with us again.
Glad to be here, especially on the 99th. I really appreciate this show. I enjoy listening to it most weeks, and thank you for your longevity and keeping it going. But the main reason I came on today was just to see if Chris ever smiles.
Well, we'll see. Well, look at that. You've already accomplished it in the first 2 minutes. Well done. I like it. All right, our next guest, Mike Koolidge, is the executive director of the Citizen Farmers and chairman of the Ogle County Republican Party. Mike, glad to have you here.
Yes, glad to be here. I'm also happen to be a lifelong Mets fan. Mets are off to a good start. White Sox, I know, not so much. Your beloved White Sox, but the Cubs are looking good too. So if we get into baseball later, I'm ready to talk.
Yeah, someone else will have to bring up that topic because the moderator of this will not do so as a
don't blame you,
depressed White Sox fan. We also have with us Dan Caulkins. He's the state representative, or was the state representative for the 88th district. Also served in the Decatur City Council, and was a veteran of the Army and a longtime business person. Dan, what's going on?
Great. Thanks for inviting me here. Doing well. Also precinct committeeman. And
you don't have enough titles? It's
no,
what do you do?
We're working on it. Trying to get my truck going to set a land speed record this summer. So we've got lots of things happening. But it's great to be on. I know Michael from years ago when he was doing his radio show. It was always fun to follow. And of course, Don Tracy, I don't get to praise you enough anymore for what you stepped into. It's great to be here. And
stepped
thanks
into and stepped on, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for including me, Collin.
Well, listen, just so it's clear for our viewers and listeners, we always invite his wife. We just get stuck with Dan. So let's just make that clear.
Yeah, Joe is definitely the better part of that deal.
We also have with us Core Strategies political experts, Michael Butler, Chris Jackowiak. Since we're recording this basically during the Masters, I try to picture what you guys would be like as golfers. I picture Michael having a really good short game, and Chris, you seem like the John Daly type. You just take a whack at it and just see where it lands. What do you think?
It's actually the inverse, Collin. My drives are terrible, but I'm one of the best putters that I know. So the inverse is actually true. You wouldn't believe it.
Interesting. I just picture you more in the John Daly pants, maybe the bright pink sweater, all that.
Oh yeah, the outfits are John Daly-esque, of course, but not necessarily the driving.
I was just gonna say, Collin, you should be glad that it's between 40 and 80 degrees today, because otherwise, I don't know if we could have handled it. We might have to call off work. That's what the Democrats say, at least.
Yeah, you're giving for some foreshadowing for an issue we're going to talk about later. But I'm thankful you guys are here, especially Chris. Pro union, pro labor Chris. I'd imagine that if we got anywhere near 80 degrees, he would demand a whole bunch of concessions. So
damn right.
Yeah, see, I called it. All right, well, let's get down to talking about some things happening down in Springfield. There are a number of bills that have been moving just in this past week. If you don't know, it's deadline week in the Illinois House, and that's why you're seeing so much movement on bills. Also, Chris Welch tends to run a pretty weird show down there in Springfield, so they decided to just do all their work in 1 week instead of, maybe doing this over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks. So here we are with tons of bills going through. There's some specific ones we're going to talk about, like the Homeschoolers Act and a few others. But before we get into those specific pieces of legislation, just wanted to open up the floor for anybody who might have thoughts. Don, I know this was something you wanted to talk about, just with the number of bills that are moving forward in Springfield and some of the legislation we've been seeing.
That wasn't my agenda.
It's all right. All right.
Might have been Dan's.
There you go. Anyone else have thoughts maybe on the things you've seen down in Springfield, especially over this last week?
Well, I sat through it, for 6 years, and both with Mike Madigan, who has the ultimate controls over how things went, and then with Chris Welch, who doesn't seem to have control over anything. So it's been it was fun times. Keep in touch with my former colleagues. Sitting in the chamber for 8 hours straight, droning on over bills is not fun. It's a terrible way to run a business, and Don will attest to this. I mean, if you had a 50-some billion-dollar business and you were trying to keep it on the right track, I don't think you'd cram all of this into 6 days or 5 days or 4 days. It's a terrible way to run the government, but because of their disorganization and I think a lot of fracturing in the Democrat caucus, it comes down to putting pressure on everybody that you just give in. I mean, that was Madigan's playbook. Just wear you down. You're finally going to vote yes, and let's get out of here.
Yeah, I was wondering, Dan, if that was part of the strategy here. The difference is that it's not like they're trying to wear them down on the budget. I mean, it's still only April. So the interesting thing here is, why would you create this level of stress and drama in, middle of April when you still got a month and a half to go here in the session? But, again, I don't think anybody could really predict or understand how Welsh likes to run things.
I should just point out, too, that most of Illinois has some of the highest paid legislators in the country, $89,250 a year. I just looked up. Pennsylvania, California, and New York are the only ones that are higher. And I don't think those are necessarily considered part-time. I know Illinois is. And I happen to know that former Representative Dan Caulkins, all of the years that he was in his state legislature, he donated all that money back. I don't know many other state legislators that did that, but these people complaining about 80-degree weather and, cramming all this work into a week, keep in mind, they get a whole lot of money from us taxpayers.
Plus another $5,000 stipend for being a committee spokes, plus a leadership stipend. Wow. So it's getting up there. Plus their per diem for being there. So, we're pushing $100,000. For the most, for the vast number of people that have been there at least 2 terms.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's anybody feeling bad for the legislators. That's for sure.
No.
Not bad for a part-time job.
Yeah, seriously. I'm looking over at Michael and Chris and wondering when they're going to demand their next raise hearing these numbers.
Or I might just run for office, Colin. Ever think about that?
I don't think anybody's ready for that, Chris.
Oh, I think they are, Colin.
I think the slogans can roll for that race, though. I think
my state senator's on trial this week, Colin. I think I got a chance.
Well, there you go. I mean, I picture you more like that Dick Cheney politician who just insults your voters more than anything.
Yeah, but that's what the voters, I think, want at the end of the day, Colin. They just want,
It's like, it'd be like the Ed DeBevics campaign where you just insult them all the way through. Forget Chris Christie. We got Chris Jackowiak.
That's right.
All right, let's move to our next topic here because there's obviously a specific piece of legislation that's really gotten most of the attention recently. And we've had breaking news. We're recording this on Thursday. There's apparently breaking news even today. So the topic is the Homeschool Act. First, the whole point of this topic as we built this agenda to talk today was about the fact that this was moved to the floor despite significant opposition. So the sponsor, Tara Costa Howard, filed an amendment which basically completely rewrote the law, and then the committee did this overnight in less than 24 hours. The committee then passed it and put it on the floor. Even though it was only less than 24 hours, still 38,000 witness slips were filed in opposition just in that short window. Just shows you just how much opposition there is for this statewide. Now, I don't know. We don't know if this is 100% true just yet, but Amy Ellick put on her social media just a few hours ago that she heard this bill will not be called on the floor. But this is Springfield. Anything can happen. They could put this in a gutted another bill, like what's the term I'm searching for right now? I'm blanking because we're on on a shell bill. So I don't think we need to operate as if this thing's actually dead. We got to act as if it's alive, even all the way through the end of session. So let's talk about it. What are you guys hearing about this bill, and certainly the tremendous level of opposition that has arisen from the original version all the way through to Amendment 2?
I've heard that it is not going to be called this week as well.
But that
so what are you guys hearing about the bill and about the opposition? Go ahead, Michael.
No, I mean, obviously, hopefully it doesn't get called period, but we've seen this in the past, where they say that now and then, months down the road it does. So we'll see, what happens. Could become a shell bill or something of that nature. But yeah, I mean, the opposition to this has just been incredible. They've had to fill out witness slips, 3 separate times. Always getting, 38,000, 40,000, like somewhere in that range. So people are very motivated against this bill. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of motivation, in support of it other than IEA, teachers unions, groups like that. And they haven't really been as vocal. It seems like the opposition is really, controlled this narrative. And if you watch some of the committee hearings that they've gotten very heated. Tara Costa Howard has been, pretty aggressive in her, rhetoric and language during those hearings, sometimes just being downright demeaning to the guest of the legislature that are, subject matter experts on this legislation. It'll be interesting to see what some of these. I mean, it sounds like the Republicans are in lockstep against it. A lot of the ones that we were kind of questioning, 2, 3, 4 weeks ago of what they would do in this situation, based on their voting record on previous bills, have put out statements saying that they're opposed. So hopefully Republicans can stay true. Let's see if we can pick off some Democrats based off of the witness slips, because that's the whole point of those. They're meant to send a message, and the message is clear that the people of Illinois do not want this.
Well, in relation to that, Butler, I'm genuinely impressed by the witness slip operation that the homeschoolers and the Illinois Republican Party and other conservative groups have kind of put out there against this bill. It's impressive, and frankly, I wish this was the case for every bad bill that goes through Springfield, that we were able to have this type of witness slip operation, because it's clear that it ended up working here. They did amend the bill. They completely gutted it. Doesn't mean it can't change again before it goes to a House vote, but I think it's definitely a victory in of itself that the witness slip operation was able to drastically change the legislation, even up to the point where people are hearing that there's not going to be a vote on this bill on the floor this week. So I think that's good. On the other hand, I'm not entirely so sure that there's going to be a lot, even if this bill passes, there's going to be a lot of electoral backlash as part of it. I've been saying for a while, as the reason why Democrats are able to pass all these bills without much repercussions, because there hasn't been political ramifications for it. And 38,000 witness slips, 40,000 witness slips, that's really good, really impressive. But you have to understand that's spread out throughout the entire state. That's not a large portion of the state's population or even the state's voting population. So I'd be interested to see if there's any pockets of these homeschoolers that actually affect a competitive district that might be able to change things around. Because right now, as impressive as the witness slip operation is from a governmental perspective, I'm still skeptical about whether or not it's actually going to mean anything electorally if this bill actually ends up passing.
I do think that it is a victory already, just because of the actions that organically occurred. I mean, to borrow a phrase from the left that we hear at these stupid rallies, these hands-off rallies, this is what democracy looks like. I don't have children in school. Most of us, I know some of us have children, but I don't know if any of us have children who are school age right now. But I have tons of friends who have kids who are in the middle of, elementary and middle school right now, and many who homeschool. And this permeated my world just from texts and stuff. I mean, this is a national story. They were talking about it on Fox News this week. This is a huge story, and the most ridiculous aspect of it is that you have the state government, people that wrote this bill, all Democrats, writing rules about people that fund everything they do, setting rules for the people that fund everything they do, who are so fed up with how Democrats are running schools that they pulled their own children out of the schools. It would be like if a city failed to plow any snow off the public streets, let's say, for years and years and years, or I don't know, maybe they only plowed 7% of the snow for years. And instead of coming up with a plan to plow the streets, they decided to write a bunch of rules for how citizens shovel their own driveways. That's what this is.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, this is another only in Illinois story. We have like the worst public school systems in the country, and so what do? We, the Democrats, they attack that part of education that's working, homeschooling. But I don't know how you explain that, except I guess they view maybe it's the best defense is a good offense. Maybe the thought here is that as long as they're focusing on homeschoolers, then people aren't looking at what a lousy, rotten public education system we have, particularly in Chicago.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think, really what this boils down to is you have parents across the state that are looking for alternative forms of education, whether that's private school or homeschooling, because they're not happy with the public education system in this state. And Pritzker and the Democrats in Springfield, instead of trying to address that issue and make public schools better and make it where, parents are more comfortable sending their kids there, they're trying to, paperwork these parents to death in hopes that they'll just give up and they'll send Sally or Johnny or their children to the public school instead. And it's like these parents are funding the public schools with their property taxes, and they're choosing to homeschool, and then here the state is, doing this. It's insane.
Well, Michael, what drives me crazy is watching our two-faced governor who, in the same breath, can attack Washington and Trump and Republicans by saying, wow, they want to close the Department of Education. Where's their plan to improve education? And then here we go in Illinois. Where's Pritzker's plan? Where's the Democrat plan to improve education? We've got some great school districts, but they succeed in spite of Springfield. You ask them, they'll tell you, even publicly, that they succeed in spite of Springfield, not because of Springfield. And yet, where's the plan to improve education in the state? We can all agree, Republican, Democrat, we can all agree that there's likely nothing more important than education, than preparing the next generation and making sure our kids are prepared to succeed and carry on the baton. And yet, where's the plan? Other than, as you said, Michael, penalizing those people who have taken their kids out of public education. And that's their right. They're the parents. This is the right of those parents because they're responsible for their kids' education. I applaud any parent who takes that level of responsibility because that's one of our biggest problems in education right now is parents not taking responsibility for their kids' education. So any parent that says, you know what, I'm going to take so much responsibility that I will do it, we should be applauding those parents and supporting them, not penalizing and attacking them.
I certainly applaud them for becoming so active, getting off the sidelines. I mean, if we're ever going to turn this state around, we got to get more good conservatives off the sidelines, and that's what these homeschoolers are doing, and the people they're helping them organize. I mean, as many of you have said, Chris, I think, and Mike, I mean, it's one of the best demonstrations of grassroots activism that we've seen in a long time in Illinois.
The homeschool lobby has in the past been a big funder. So, I mean, if these people actually pulled themselves together, they could have some influence in races. The other part of this is, if I've watched all of this go down, this is complete and total nonsense. First of all, the bill is absolutely crazy, and it's I think a demonstration of exactly the power that the teachers unions hold over the Democrat caucus. And this is how they're trying to get their hands on these kids that are not coming to school. And because schools don't get paid for kids that aren't there. So I think that's part of the problem.
Well, in this case, schools are getting paid even though the kids aren't there. But I think, Dan, one of the things that I think your point is that they want to get their hands on these kids.
Right.
Why? You have to ask yourself why. Why do the schools want their hands on these kids? It's because they're succeeding. So then why do you want them? Why are they succeeding? Maybe we could connect these dots. It's like Democrat voters moving out of the city of Chicago because they love the great communities and great schools out in the suburbs. And then they still keep voting Democrat. Like, it's that same idea. Why are these kids succeeding? Maybe we should focus on that and learn from that.
Well, I think this is an opportunity to build bridges to some of the minority communities in this state. We're making inroads into Chicago. Flip Chicago red. You look at the voting patterns for Trump, and you pointed it out. I think the 13th ward actually was a majority Trump ward, and we're seeing that. And I think if you're thinking about this and you're a minority. And you think about what's going on, and I'll go off the rail. My wife will see this and kill me. But what you have are liberal, white, suburban women telling the minority community how to educate their kids.
Exactly. That's exactly right. The affluent, liberal, white women, mostly too, who always vote Democrat no matter what, and want to tell everyone else how to live their lives. And I mean, it should be pointed out too, and forgive me for putting on my old radio host hat, Collin, but the specifics of this bill are insane. You know, parents may be, or no, truancy officers required to interview children if their parents don't register. Children as young as 6 years old. So you're going to have the state, some state bureaucrat going into someone's home somehow and interview, excuse me, mom and dad, you need to go to the other room. I need to talk to your 6-year-old and interview them. You're not allowed to be in this room. That's what the bill actually says. It's insanity. And thank God it's probably that part I think has been drastically changed. But to think they were even attempting this.
Oh, so they changed the language of it, Mike, but it still means the same thing. They just changed some of the words to make it seem like they fixed that.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem with this latest amendment is it changes a lot of the words. This is like during the Rauner days where he's like, we got to get better at telling our story, and then no policy change, just package it differently. The House Amendment 2 to this bill, that's all it does. It just repackages the exact same thing, worded a heck of a lot better. Like, this is what they should have filed initially. The wording of this is less politically incendiary, but the damage has already been done. Two other things I want to point out as we close down this topic. First, I would like to give kudos where it's due, and you guys have given a lot of really good kudos to the homeschoolers and some of the conservative organizations and grassroots organizations. I just want to give kudos as well to the House Republicans who have really led the charge on this since it's a bill in the House. They've been really strong on this. Their messaging has been really good. I just saw what they put out recently where they say they're committed to protecting homeschool freedom. They're going to continue to push back against this assault on parental rights. And I love this from last week. I saw this talking about how parents are more trustworthy than politicians, and how Illinois Democrats are voting to give authority to politicians instead of parents. I thought that was a really good line and a good angle on this. So kudos to the House Republicans for fighting on the front lines on this issue.
Well, and you got to give a shout out to Blaine Wilhauer and Amy Ellick on that committee. If you watch that, they did an incredible job asking tough questions, pushing back, using the rules to our advantage. And I think that was great. We just need to see more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I know Amy doesn't get a lot of kudos from conservatives often enough, but she was a fighter on this. Travis Weaver also did great on this. Some real good rock stars in the Republican Party in the House who've shown up for this fight, and it's been great to see.
Should have made him read every witness record.
Yeah.
There you go. Last thing I'll say, we can't leave without saying this because we pointed it out at an event recently, but this needs to be in an episode. For the third time in the last few weeks, Katie Stewart has been subbed out of committee so she didn't have to vote on a contentious piece of legislation. And the reason why this is so egregious, and people keep missing this, she's now been subbed out twice on this bill, and she is a sponsor of the bill. She's literally being subbed out so she doesn't have to vote on her own bill because it's so unpopular. That's the level of backbone you get out of Katie Stewart. And it absolutely deserves to be pointed out. And I'm glad to see the House Republicans holding her to account for that because it is as spineless as I've ever seen.
It's not just Katie. Fred Crespo was subbed out this week. They were shuffling people around that didn't want to have to vote for this in committee to make sure it got out of committee. Tara Kostler Howard, she's a cartoon. I mean, if you were to put together clips of her facial expressions, her eye rolling, the glasses up, the glasses down, the whole thing, she is a cartoon character, and we got to figure out a way to do something about it.
Michael, and it's a Katie Stewart topic. I know you like to jump in on those. So go ahead and have the final word as we finish this topic.
No, I was just gonna say she must be a little worried about her career if they're doing that.
I mean, listen, that district is always right on the edge of being in play. This is the kind of thing that could put you in play. So as much as people like to poo-poo and say, Republicans aren't going to challenge that district, this is the kind of thing that could make that race in play. So I politically, I don't blame her for not putting her name or putting her vote on this. But the damage is done. She's already a sponsor. She's already
and she. I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit last week, but she kind of had a rough day on April 1st. A lot of her allies were not successful in the consolidated election, so I would imagine that kind of plays into some of this as well.
Yep, certainly not.
And the homeschoolers, I mean, if the homeschoolers decide this is the district they want to play in, they have the resources.
And that's the point to Chris's point. Can this be mobilized? Can this be targeted? If you spread out 45,000 people throughout the state, that has an impact. But you send those people, all those people and their resources and their time into one or two districts, now we're cooking with gas and something might happen. So the key is going to be here, regardless of what happens with this bill, we need to keep these people engaged and have them involved in the 2026 elections. Otherwise, this is all just a giant waste of time. All right, let's move to our next topic here. So we're talking more legislative and policy issues. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this topic, but it is in the news. The House Republicans are pushing a lawsuit to the Supreme Court in Illinois. I'm trying to see if the Supreme Court would weigh in on redistricting from a different perspective. And the Supreme Court said, no, they're not going to hear it. Obviously, House Republicans are unhappy about that. We've talked about this a few times. We don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time here, but if anyone has thoughts, I think we could all agree that this is the most gerrymandered map in the country, and it's certainly anti-democratic. The question is, can you do something about it? Which at this point means going and winning a bunch of elections the next 5 or 6 years. But anybody have thoughts on this process?
Well, I think that, there's been some, I would say, probably trolling on social media, even from some people on the right, related to this result where the Supreme Court, declined to hear this case. But first thing, when this was passed, they filed a suit in federal court. Obviously, that was unsuccessful. So, this is the kind of the second bite at the apple. But also, there's precedent from other states where other state Supreme Courts have said that they wanted to see, 1 or 2 cycles with a map before they would weigh in on the gerrymandering itself, right? They wanted to kind of see what the results were, and are these criticisms by the Republicans in this instance warranted? But obviously with J.B. Pritzker and pouring all this money into the Illinois Supreme Court and buying those seats, you're not going to get anywhere, unfortunately.
I don't necessarily think it's an apples to apples comparison here, Butler, because in many of the other states where they had contested remaps, it was mostly in relation to violations of the Voting Rights Act, not necessarily as a result of partisan gerrymandering. I perused the decision by the Illinois Supreme Court, and I think they honestly made a halfway decent point. Is if they actually did want to hear this, it would put it up in the air that you could basically challenge a remap whenever you deem necessary. And you could be 2 cycles in, 3 cycles in. You can completely change the map of the state if you wanted to. And I agree with them. I don't think that's a good precedent to be set. Now, that being said, I do think that, yes, the maps are a problem if you're the Illinois Republican Party. And it is a pretty egregious gerrymandering process. But if you want to fix this, the way to do it wasn't to wait a cycle and then take your crack at the Illinois Supreme Court. That wasn't the way to go about do this. You need to do it early. You need to have a better case. And it isn't surprising whatsoever that this got thrown out.
I agree with I guess the Supreme Court decision on throwing out the compact argument in there. And I've never understood why the suit was not filed earlier on the compact argument. There are 2 arguments, one was, that the districts are not compact. And then the other was that it was a product of partisan gerrymandering that was inconsistent with free and equal elections and political fairness. So it was a 2-part challenge. And it was on the first part, compact doesn't require data. The argument, you look at the districts, you see they're not compact. Jim Nolan has been, pushing this lawsuit for, I don't know, almost as soon as the maps came out. He spoke at the State Central Committee meeting about it. I met with him, but it was the legislators' call to do it, and I think they had actually funding to do it. And I've never understood. Maybe Dan can answer it. I've never understood why this lawsuit wasn't filed earlier. But on the other, that's on compact. On the political fairness side of it, I completely disagree with the opinion. I think Judge Overstreet wrote, a great dissent on it, pointing out that for lashes, what they did, they just said there's no statute of limitations here. So it's not a timing, it really isn't a timing issue, except it's an equitable thing, lashes, if you sleep on your rights. The courts will sometimes say, even though there's no statute of limitations, you still waited too long. But it's a two-part test. The first part is that you didn't use the due diligence to come to the court in time, and you slept in your rights. But the second part is the other side has to be unduly prejudiced, and the opinion does not really establish that. And in fact, procedurally, the defendants, the State Board of Education and the members, never even raised that issue. In fact, the court raised it on its own motion,
Yeah.
and then allowed the interveners, Welch and Harmon, to come in, which, according to Justice Overstreet, was entirely inappropriate. So that part of the case does require on data, and I think a very good argument can be made. That part of the case was timely, because you needed an election cycle or two to show to prove up partisan gerrymandering. So yeah, I think it's a bad decision.
A bad decision we expected, but I think, Don, to your point, when you talk about how this map was drawn in a partisan way, Democrats have not been shy about that. They have said so publicly that we drew this map with partisan impact in mind. They never hid that. I mean, that's the point here in Illinois. You can flaunt the rules, you can do whatever you want, and then as long as you own the courts, you're safe, you're fine. And that's kind of the problem here. Is Democrats have never hidden the fact that yes, they drew these maps based on partisan interests more than almost anything else. I think you could have proven that earlier, but I do think there's a logical point here that you're making, Don, that having some data to back that up certainly strengthens your case.
Yeah, but they could have filed the first case on compactness and then amended later on the political fairness thing. But I think it's particularly ironic here that we lose the remap case because the Democrats remapped the judicial districts so they could end up with a 5-2 majority.
Yeah.
And
speaking of data, to try to keep it positive. I mean, I agree with a lot of what was said, even though I know there was some disagreement with the compact issue and the speed of this lawsuit being brought up. But two of the legislators spoke to all of the county GOP chairmen a couple of weeks ago on our monthly statewide call. And one thing that really was compelling was the statistic about the 2022 midterms that said, if you count up all of the votes of people who voted for Republican state house members in Illinois in 2022, not a presidential year, and you count up all the people who voted for Democrat house members, it was 1.9 Republicans to 1.8 Democrats. That's really something else. I mean, that shows that, gosh, if we can just get out our voters in certain elections, I know it's a broken record here. We might have a shot someday of getting out, winning a statewide election again. But so that is a number that I keep telling people who say, Illinois is a lost cause. It's never going to turn purple. Well, if we are better at getting out our voters, even just in a midterm election year, Republicans do have statewide more than Democrats who vote, according to very recent election data.
Well, I'm going to rain on your brain a little bit here, Mike, and I apologize. But the reason why there were more Republican votes for legislative candidates than Democratic votes is because in 2022, the Illinois Republican Party, along with the Illinois Policy Institute, made a pretty bold idea that they were going to contest a bunch of unwinnable seats. My state rep district is like Dem plus 40. I had a contested race, which I'm thankful for. I got to vote for Republican in that seat instead of Justin Slaughter. But the Dems left a lot of Republicans alone. Dan, did you have a challenger in 2022?
No.
In a Democratic? Okay, so Dan, there were no Democratic votes at all in Dan's district, but in my district there were Republican votes against Justin Slaughter. That's the reason why there is a greater number of Republican votes for state rep than there is for Democrats for state rep. Now, that being said, I will concede the point that you're correct that had there been a more equitable mapping situation, it isn't necessarily that the Republicans would have won everything, but they wouldn't be in a super duper minority like they are right now.
Right.
Okay. It would be a much more closer with equitable maps. It wouldn't be an outright majority. The idea that it would be is not true, but it certainly would have been closer had you given every seat, a challenge And, equitable maps, it would have been a little bit more closer.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I think we can all, as data guys, we can agree the numbers are roughly 55-45. This is roughly a 55% Dem, 45% Republican state. So you think about, how that breaks down with the congressional delegation or the state legislative delegation. That's significantly more Republican seats, in some cases double what we have now. So if you were to have any sort of fair map process, there'd be significantly more of a Republican voice in this state. But either way, I want to get us sort of back on track here, just because we'll stay on the topic.
One more thing,
just
Collin.
Just hold on. Hold on. So I want to just get us refocused on the political reality here, just because we can focus on redistricting all we want. We're not going to change this. That's not going to happen. So if we could shift over to what's the political reality here, either of the filing of this lawsuit, or how do we change this? What do we do to make this better? If we could refocus there for just a couple more minutes on this topic, that'd be good.
Let me give you a little insight. I was on the HRO committee when the original lawsuit was filed, and my plea was that we file this in the Illinois courts, take it to the Illinois Supreme Court. And the reason, I knew, and I presume the others knew, that this was a losing cause, but it was something that needed to be done. I said, let's take this to the Illinois Supreme Court and make the members of the Illinois Supreme Court go on record favoring gerrymandering. Make them go on record favoring gerrymandering and use that against them in November. That would have been a big issue in the November Supreme Court elections. They drew their own maps.
And it's nice to have that as an issue to contrast with, that's for sure. Don,
right.
give the final word on this topic.
Well, I was just going to say the one silver lining I can think of anyway is that it gave us yet another opportunity to remind the public that Pritzker lied about the fair maps. When he lied, he said he would not sign an unfair map, and of course, that's exactly what he did.
Yeah. Yet again, Pritzker showing his hypocrisy, and I think
it's what's the strategy? Why? I mean, what's the end game? You're going. First of all, they didn't ask me, but the first thing they should have done is ask those two judges to recuse themselves, like I did in the lawsuit on the gun bill. Should have asked them to recuse themselves. They were there because of the gerrymandering, because of the districts that were drawn, and they should have been recused. And then you had a case. Because they were going to recuse themselves.
They absolutely should have recused themselves after a Harmon interview.
This is the lack of political strategy that we have in the leadership of this party. Nobody is willing to think the long game.
Well, let's move to our next topic. Dan, I know you're heated, and I like it, and I think it's well placed in our next topic, because we're talking about what's the next step here. We just had another rough election last Tuesday, and we dissected it. We spent a ton of time on it. The whole episode last week was about that election, but I know the people we had on last week aren't the only ones with thoughts. So I have a feeling this is going to be a topic we'll be talking about for the coming weeks. I know you three, as our guest this week, a lot of you had thoughts on what do we do next? How do we improve? How do we do things better? So this is your chance. Let's talk about it. The next election cycle starts in just 4 months. That's not a lot of time to get our shit together and start doing better as a party, because we can't have another election like last Tuesday. So what do you guys think? What are your lessons from these local elections, and what should we be doing better to go out there and win some races?
I can tell. Let's do with what we talked about with the homeschoolers. Okay. You have an interest group, a very powerful interest group. If they join arms and they go after one or two of the primary sponsors of that bill, and start today, start this week, next week, whatever, and I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican, go find primary opponents or find a general election opponent and teach these people a lesson. You're not going to do this. And then the business community's got to get off their ass. They're getting killed. And if they don't get behind one or two candidates, I mean, they expect Republicans to carry their water. The manufacturers, chamber, all these folks, realtors, they expect us to carry their water. And yet when it comes time for elections, they're sitting on their hands. We need to take out 2, 3, 4 vulnerable Democrats, and we need to have 4 well-funded campaigns today. Republicans are sitting on, the leadership in the House and maybe the Senate, but in the House we're talking about. They're sitting on what, $1 million, $1.5 million between Tony and all the rest of them. They ought to take that money right now and go, okay, here's the 3 House seats we're going after. We're putting up $250,000 in those 3 House seats today. The money's in the bank. Now, go find 3 candidates and let's start campaigning. Let's start being part of the community. Let's start doing outreach. And there's that money. And when you get through the primary, there's another $250,000 waiting for you. But do it today. Fund these people.
Dan, you're talking about something that I've been sort of pushing back very privately and sometimes publicly on with both the House and Senate Republicans, which is we should be doing things now, paying for things even now. I think they always look at the fact that we're so outspent by Democrats that we've got to save every penny because we're going to be buried in September and October. But my point is elections are won and lost now, not October, November. And yes, does it mean that if you spend that $250,000 now, you won't have it come September? Absolutely. But you can build up your candidates' name recognition. You can build up your opposition's negatives. You can build up sign locations, volunteer lists. You can build up an army in the district if you jump in now. And we should be doing, I've been saying this for a long time, every time Democrats vote on a bill, there should be text alerts in their districts. Did you know, to all the swing voters, did you know your Democrats just took away parental rights, just raised your gas prices, just raised your property taxes? We should be hammering them year round. For whatever reason, we spend our money in the last couple months and then get dwarfed by the other side and wonder why we keep losing. Guerrilla warfare is required to win these elections, and that means 24/7, 365 campaigning. You're not waiting until next summer to finally actually get out there, and now we'll start spending some money.
So you can do the Wisconsin, what they did in Wisconsin. Start in January. And in these House districts, if you go out and you hire 6 or 8 people to knock on doors, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, $25,000 a month, and how many hundreds of thousands of touches and return visits and door knocking can you get done for $25,000 a month? That's 10 months, $250,000 just for people to knock doors from January to October.
Michael, you've been trying to jump in. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah,
well, no,
I mean,
it's exactly
that
right.
Michael. There's
Sorry.
2 Michaels on here. Which one were you meaning?
I think of you, Mike and Michael. So Butler, go ahead, and then Koolidge.
All right. Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, Senate Dems are already running ads in the Chris Belt district. Trying to get his name ID up, talking about all the great things that he's done. I mean, they're doing it, and I totally agree. We've got to start doing more of that. And I also think, some of the things that we did in the Metro East in this April election, there was some stuff that didn't cost us anything or cost us very little at all. You got people submitting FOIA requests that, so we can draw attention to some of the things that the local Democrats were doing down here. There's ways to get the message out there that doesn't cost, tens of millions of dollars.
Well, listen, that's part of our problem is putting in the work. I mean, ultimately, I think Dan said it a little bit ago. We got to get off our butts. I mean, that's part of this here. Is money isn't the whole solution. It's not even half the solution. We got to get out there and work, and that's part of our problem. So,
yeah,
Mike,
and
Michael,
so much of that has to do with, or there's, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have these things in Illinois called county and township Republican parties. We have now a bunch of election cycles and a bunch of data. I mean, I've only been chairman of my local party since 2023. Actually, no, 2022. It's been 2 years. Now we have a bunch of elections to say, okay, every precinct committeeman, how many voters came out in 2022 versus 2024? And then the midterms, how many touches did you do? How many times did you knock on the door? We have a list of unreliable Republicans like me. I'm a precinct committeeman too. Flag 6, Rochelle, Illinois. I know there's about 60 people in my precinct that vote in presidential elections, but don't vote in municipals. But they vote in every presidential one. I knocked on those doors just a couple of weeks ago. Said, hey, I know there's not a whole lot going on in in the Rochelle, school district races, but why not just vote tomorrow? Just be a good citizen, and I'll come knocking your door in a couple weeks too, or a couple months too. That kind of stuff can be fostered. We're doing it, with the citizen farmers. We try to fund these grassroots efforts that do that. But if we have all of the parties doing that locally, and then the candidates come in on top of that, it's like a double punch. It can be done. The candidates concentrate on the swing voters, the independents, the people that they're trying to convince to vote, and the party gets the diehards and the unreliables out. And it can't. The Democrats have done this for years. They did it in Colorado. They switched it from a red state to a purple state to a blue state. We can do it in Illinois, and it starts with the local parties doing the basics right.
Yeah, Mike, but in Colorado, it was like 3 billionaire donors that led that. They wrote a book about it. The
Yeah, I
blueprint,
know. I've got it. I've got it
and
here on my desk. All right, the
and
answer to that is
Collin-
simple. 3 or 4 people on this call become billionaires, and help fund this.
Don't call and give me a
Any
raise.
volunteers?
Well, yeah, I think you have to move to Silicon Valley first. But
Or
Collin, you say
Tennessee,
resources aren't. You sound like you're saying. Well, a lot of people in the grassroots community say is that resources aren't really all that important. And I guess you can live on love in politics. But when the other side's spending 10 million and you got $1 million for get out the vote, it's pretty tough to compete with. And so what I want to ask Dan is, how do we get the business community off their hands? I think I raised a fair amount of money during my tenure, but it was really tough getting the business community to act, because it just seemed like there was an intimidation fear out there of particularly if they were doing business with the government, and then then the other thing was they. Like in Chicago, it's peer pressure. Most Chicagoans are Democrats, and the business people at the highest levels are many prominent Democrats. So Dan, do you have any ideas on how can we get the business community off? And then of course, this past week, Mark Denzel, I think a lot of him, IMA and all that, but they just got a trip to Mexico, with the governor, and so the governor's courting them too, with all the power and mystique and majesty of the governor's office. So how do we get the business community off and involved off the sidelines?
We need to blackmail them. No, that. I guess it's the message is, how bad do you want it? Because no matter what you do, no matter how you play ball with the Democrats, they stab you in the back. And we can go look at issue after issue after issue. They're spending money, and the Republicans are giving them a free ride, because it's the conservative values that we have and the things that we vote for, and they take advantage of that. They take us for granted, essentially. Farm Bureau being one of them. I mean, if the Farm Bureau really wanted to get aggressive, they could go out and fund 2 candidates. I mean, it's go find 2 candidates that have stabbed you in the back. Chung and Bloomington would be the first one I'd go after.
Considering she keeps pretending like she supports the estate tax reform, and yet every time it never moves anywhere.
So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing that we're seeing with Trump. What we saw for the last 4 years was a bunch of lip service, and now we got somebody that's actually going to take advantage of their position. These folks have a tremendous amount of clout. They have a tremendous workforce that we're seeing these union members trend more conservative, especially when their kids aren't getting an education. Their property taxes are going up. Their utility bills are going up. The cost of doing business in Illinois for small business owners is absolutely atrocious, as Don knows, compared to going to Indiana, Missouri, Iowa. And I don't, Don, I don't know. I mean, I guess I would find two House districts that could be flipped, that look good, and say, look, here, adopt these House districts, and we're going to go out, and I don't care, Cor, or I don't care, somebody, go find a good candidate in those House districts and say, Here's what we're going to do for you. Not go get your petition signed and have a couple fundraisers and, and knock on 1,000 doors and then come to us and, the Republican House HRO and, we'll talk about funding you. No, you've got to put the money on the table and you're going to attract good candidates and they know that they're going to have financial support from now through the primary. And then after they get through the primary, they're going to get another load. And you can do it.
One of the best ways that I've seen that done in the past, both in Illinois and in other states, is by finding candidates from those communities. I remember when we had a decade ago in Illinois, we had some candidates on the Republican side who came from NFIB, who came from the manufacturers, and suddenly now they had even more of an impetus to get involved because it was one of their members, it was one of their people, one of their board members. And when we've had conversations with some of those groups, they're reticent to recruit their people to run. But if an outside group came in and said, you know what, we'll help you do it. So you're not held responsible. It's not a problem for you, but we'll come in and we'll help you guys recruit one of your members to run. And then you guys can all get behind them. I think if we're looking for sort of tangible steps that we can take, the manufacturing community does not have representation down in Springfield anymore. Small business community is barely represented down in Springfield. Farming community is barely represented down in Springfield. There are some, but certainly not enough. You go find some new recruits to take on the Sharon Chung, take on the Turner or whoever it might be who's going to be one of your targets, the Halpins of the world. You go find some of those people who come from that community. I've said for a long time, you want to win aisle 17, go find a manufacturer out of Rockford. Like if we go find people who are part of that community, I think that is part of how you're going to get them off the sidelines and into the fight.
Right. Well, that's the deal. I mean, that's what you have to have. I had somebody come to me last week and said, hey, I want to get involved. I'm a contractor, my family's raised now, and how do I get involved? And I said, go join the chamber. Here's a list of chamber events. Go meet people in the community. Get involved with a charitable organization, United Way organization. Find a place that fits you and get on their board. Get to be known in the community. Have roots in this community. Have contacts in this district. And it wasn't a house race. It was a local. They wanted to get involved in local, city council race 2 years down the road. I said, but you have to have roots. You have to have connections to the people in your district. You can't just pick up the phone one day and decide I'm going to run and nobody knows who you are.
Yeah. And Don, one thing I just want to make sure I make clear, I'm a capitalist, so I'm all about the party raising more money. But I think the point that I have is when you have it, how do you spend it? That's the key. Because we have way less than the other side, and I respect that fact. And it's hard to win. It's hard to run a party. How many times have I talked about how difficult it is to run a party when you can afford 2 or 3 staffers, and you look around the country, these people have 10, 20 staffers. I get it. My point is how you deploy those resources. If you hold on to what little you have, and then you roll it out in the final 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, you're going to get dwarfed. And that's my only point, is that if you have this much, don't hold on to it. Yes, it means we're going to be dwarfed even more in September and October. But if you spend it now, you're going to be able to actually have an advantage, because in most of these districts, Democrats aren't spending. They're not out there campaigning right now. This is where we have an advantage. We don't have a lot of advantages, so use this now. That was my point.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to our next topic so we can keep going on the agenda. Some political stuff has happened since our last recording, and so I think it's important we talk about it. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but Cook County is going to have a new Republican chairman. Sean Morrison has been the chairman for a handful of years here. His replacement will be taking over in just a couple weeks. The county is going to be having a vote. Multiple sources have said that it's likely going to be Aaron Del Mar who takes over. He was the chairman prior to Sean Morrison. So some interesting politics here, especially since Aaron is, I should say, Dan Caulkins' best buddy, Aaron Del Mar. He's targeting a race for governor, so there's some interesting dynamics there. And I think you guys can all agree, and maybe Don, I'll start with you on this. The job of chairman is incredibly thankless. Mike, as a county chairman, it's a lot of work, and you're probably only ever recognized when something goes wrong. So, I mean, that is just a difficult job. So regardless of how you feel about Sean Morrison, I want to kick off the topic just with this. Thank you, Sean, for taking on that role, that thankless role. Yeah, sure. A lot of people have opinions about what you did or didn't do in that role, but just thank you for doing the job, especially a county as big as Cook County. That is a difficult job. So thanks to Sean. Obviously, now we can talk about the politics that go into this, if anybody has thoughts.
Well, I do have some thoughts on this. I've heard Sean himself say many times. I've never researched it myself, but I've heard him say that Cook County is the largest county in the country, and that also Cook County routinely produces the most Republican votes of any county in the entire nation. So it's a and obviously, what is it, 5 million out of our 12 million or so? I mean, it's the most critical county, to voting. It's why we're a blue state. You take away Cook County, and I don't know what I think we'd be red. Collars have been going the wrong way, but I still think we'd be a red state. Haven't done the numbers, but anyway, so I've often thought, long thought that Cook County deserves pretty much a full-time county chair. It's such an important county, and in a county of 5 million, it's just hard to believe you can't find somebody, who can do the job for little or nothing, and that has, the ability to really turn that county around. And I like Sean a lot, but Sean always had a lot of balls in the air. He was running a very large a security company, I think 250 employees or so. And then he also a county commissioner, which is almost a full-time job in and of itself. He's on the state central committee, and he was helpful to me many times, and I really like Sean, and I think he did as much as he could, but he didn't have a lot of time for the job. And I do think this is an opportunity for Cook County to find somebody who has the amount of time that Cook County deserves. And so I hope they do that and don't rush into the decision and get somebody just because of political strawmanning and what. And then the last thing I want to say is that on Aaron, if Aaron's going to be that person and devote full time to it and do it long term, I mean that's one thing. But if Aaron's just planning to use that that position as a platform for running for governor, well, I think that is the wrong thing.
I think there's politics here. I mean, Chris, Michael, you guys I'll lean on for the sort of the political stuff that we'd like to have these conversations. My question is, why would Aaron want it? I mean, so it seems like based on statements that Aaron has made and Gary Rabine's deleted post that Chicago and Cook County are central to Aaron's strategy for winning the Republican primary for governor. So my guess is the whole goal here is making sure he gets the Cook County Republican endorsement because it's a big part of his strategy for how he's going to win the primary for governor. So that's my guess as to why he wants to keep it in the family. But I think down to your point, if you're running for governor, are you really going to have time to be the Cook County Republican Party chairman? It's a difficult thing to do. And, he said it last week. He's good at wearing a lot of hats, and I respect him because I couldn't wear as many hats as he does. But this is an important job. And so are you going to take the job to do the job? I think that's a relevant and fair question.
From a political perspective here, I don't think it's necessarily a surprise that Morrison resigned. I mean, I've heard Sean say, and Sean's been saying this for years, that this was going to be his last turn running the Southwest Republican organization. I'm curious to whether or not he runs for re-election to the Cook County Board. He has a very, very purple district. His last two elections have been very, very close elections. I hope he does. I think Morrison does a great job at the county board, and he's a great voice to have. But I think it's going to be interesting going forward to see what he does there. And again, it's interesting that, I love Aaron cuts the best deals Del Mar as much as the next guy. But it's going to be interesting because we're going kind of backwards here. Del Mar was the chairman before Morrison, and now we're kind of going back to Del Mar. I really don't know if that really means anything. We've had a pretty good operation running in Cook County the last few years as I've been involved in Republican Party politics. So I thank Morrison for the job he's done. He's still going to be the Palos committeeman. He's still going to be on the state central committee. So I'm interested to see where the county party goes.
Yeah. All right, let's move to our next topic here. So let's talk about some Democrat political moves. There's been two that have really raised some eyebrows over the last week. So one of them I think is bold is the best way I can put it. So allies of Lauren Underwood, the Democratic congresswoman from the 14th congressional district, who is clearly eyeing a run for Senate, her allies have run a poll in Illinois and published that poll that have shown that supposedly, at least according to that poll, Underwood is in the lead of the potential candidates who are looking at that race. They polled her, they polled Raja Krishnamoorthy, they polled Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, and they polled Congresswoman Kelly, Robin Kelly. Those are the four they tested. I know there will be plenty more who get in the race, especially if Durbin's out of the race. But it's an interesting strategy to take a poll here and publish it while the sitting senator is still there and hasn't decided what he is or isn't going to do. So that's raised a lot of eyebrows. And then Susana Mendoza coming out pretty publicly and pretty clear in being opposed to the Safety Act. There's not a lot of ambiguity here, and so clearly making a lane for herself. We've talked about multiple times on this podcast, as have many others, that she's looking at running for Chicago's mayor in 2027. So you've got two players in the Democratic Party who've made some pretty public, fairly controversial statements and or actions in the last week. So take your angle, whichever you want. Jump on in with your thoughts on what's going on here.
So
let's let Koolidge go first.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's been a while. No, there's an embarrassment of riches, obviously, for Democrats in Illinois with all of all of these hobnobbers, and it's funny. I went to a day of the Democrat National Convention in Chicago this summer, and a conservative journalist came up to me who it was his first convention ever, and he was kind of like looking over his shoulder and kind of scared. He's like, gosh, like what if people here find out that I'm conservative? Are they gonna? And I said, like, out of Jurassic Park, no one cares. All Democrats care about is their own power. They're all positioning themselves for what they thought was going to be a Kamala Harris administration and all the jobs and stuff. We're irrelevant, Republicans and conservatives, to Democrats on the national level at that point anyway. And definitely here in Illinois, you have mayor of Chicago, U.S. Senate seat, and governor. Those are the three. Everything else is child's play to them. What is Pritzker going to do? Is there any indication whatsoever that he might run for Senate? If he does, I know that's going to tick off a lot of people. And does that open up the door for Janulius to run for governor, Kelly to run for governor? It's all these egos. None of them have any competence whatsoever to do the jobs. And it's musical chairs. So as far as appealability and likability goes, I think both, again, speaking as a conservative Republican who despises all of the politics of these people, if you were to rank them in likability, I think Underwood and Raja are actually pretty up there. They're not as deplorable as so many of these other people are personality wise. So if I had to choose any two that might seem the most appealing, I would choose those two. But what position? Who knows?
Interesting.
So I will preface my remarks by saying my famous line: I will believe Senator Durbin is not running for re-election when I see the press release or the obituary, neither of which have come out yet. So I'm operating under the assumption he is running again up until this point. That being said, I think it's interesting that Stratton was so low in this poll, but I think that's pretty accurate because nobody really knows who Juliana Stratton is because the lieutenant governor in the state doesn't really do anything. And yeah, Pritzker's been sending her out there, and she's been doing some fundraising, getting a little bit of media coverage. But in reality, she doesn't really have a high profile. She had one term as a state rep after she kicked out Ken Duncan, and after that, she's just been lieutenant governor, kind of sitting on her head and not really doing anything. So, I think it's accurate. But I will say, if this is the field, which I don't think it will be, but if this is the exact field that runs for Senate, that Stratton number is going to go way through the roof. Because she'll have money, she'll have more money. Pritzker will endorse her pretty early out of the gate, so she'll have that going for her. And I think she'll perform better than the poll numbers indicate. But I did think it was interesting. I was reading the CapFax comments about this article, and the CapFax comments, somebody said that there was actually a question about Kasten, his favorabilities, and they were kind of doing some push testing on Kasten in this poll. And Kasten's a name that I've been hearing thrown around for U.S. Senate as well. He's very much tied to Senator Durbin, and he's also would be the only white candidate in this race, and racial politics does mean something still, even in the Democratic Party. So I think it'd be interesting if you threw Sean Kasten's name in there, where he would perform relative to the rest of the candidates in this poll. I think it's a stretch to say Underwood's this far ahead. I don't think it's terribly inaccurate to say that, unfortunately, but there's definitely some strategy here coming out this poll early. If you think Durbin's not running again, get some momentum behind you. I have thoughts on Mendoza, but I don't want to keep rambling on about them.
Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned Caston. Michael and I have noted several times that Caston's been doing town halls in red districts. It's an excuse for him to start campaigning statewide, kind of like Raja's been doing. So I don't think you're wrong that Caston's certainly eyeballing this.
I said that Underwood and Raja are the most likable. I would put Caston at the lowest and not a good human being whatsoever. I think that will come out in the wash if he does decide to run. He's a terrible, terrible person.
Yeah, he's got 2 rallies, one in Dixon, Illinois, or town halls, one in Dixon, Illinois, one in Carterville this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of response he gets, who shows up. But obviously he's angling for something. Why would he come down here? I think it's interesting that the Democrat County Chairman's Association is, helping him orchestrate all this. All the RSVPs are being run through them. So maybe he has some allies there that are up to something, doing something a little underhanded.
Chris, who runs the Democratic County Chairman's Association, and who are they tied to? So isn't it Houlihan? Isn't that a Durbin controlled?
Well, you're losing my knowledge of that industry is seriously going out of the woods. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Durbin's people still run it. And Caston is very, 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 very much tied to the Dick Durbin world in Illinois politics. So if this, I always thought it might be more of a Nikki Budzinski play if she wanted to represent, because she literally represents the same area that Durbin did. Somebody told me that Dick Durbin's her actual factual godfather, at her baptism. So I don't know if that's true or not. People say that about a lot of people. I always thought it'd be Budzinski who make this play, but it doesn't necessarily surprise me. It might be Caston as well.
It's interesting to watch. Question will be: Can Republicans, if it's not Durbin on the Democratic side, on the Republican side, can Republicans run a electable candidate, someone who can actually make this a race?
Probably not. I have thoughts on the Mendoza stuff. If you want to go to
anybody else have thoughts on the Senate race before Chris gets to have a little fun and talk Chicago for a minute? All right, let's let Chris have 60 seconds of fun. Go ahead, buddy.
So the Mendoza play is actually very interesting because it's tied into the new state's attorney of Cook County, Eileen O'Neill Burke, kind of coming out pretty strongly against judges who are not, giving defendants who are not locking trials up pre-trial lockup. These are words here, but they want to object. She wants the prosecutors to object every time they put somebody on electronic monitoring pre-trial or give them pre-trial release. And that was what Mendoza was responding to in relation to the Safety Act as a whole. Mendoza is trying to position herself as more of a conservative candidate for mayor of Chicago. Now, the viewership might ask, why would she do that? The city of Chicago, it's obviously extremely Democratic. Why would Susana Mendoza want to do that? And the answer is this is very simple. If you can consolidate the conservative and moderate white vote in the first round of an election, in addition to the Hispanic vote, which Mendoza did very well with in 2020, in 2019. Just ask me. I was on the other Hispanic candidate running for mayor at that time. I know how well Susana Mendoza did with Hispanics. So if you can consolidate those two demographics in a first round of the election, it'll get you to a second round and position you pretty strongly. So that's kind of the political calculus it seems Mendoza's going with now. If she can come off as, pretty center road Democrat who can appeal to working class white voters on the northwest and southwest side of the cities, in addition to Hispanic voters, sets her up well in the first round going into the second round. The issue for her is going to be how many white candidates jump into the race for mayor of Chicago. They're talking Alexi Julius. They're talking Bill Conway. They're talking Arnie Duncan, because they always talk about Arnie Duncan, okay? They're talking about Rahm Emanuel. He might come back. Who knows? I hope he doesn't, but I think it would be funny if he did. They talk about all these different people who come in, and that's a disadvantage for Mendoza or any conservative candidate because they're going to split the white vote just as happened in 2019. Again, I was there. So again, she's trying to consolidate her vote early. A lot of people are pretty excited about the possibility of her running. People on this podcast have come out excited about the possibility of her running, and even Democrats seem pretty excited. Whoever runs, there won't be a Mayor Brandon Johnson after the next election, just as there wasn't going to be a Mayor Lori Lightfoot. So smart moving by Mendoza.
I've attended the police officer memorial every year. And she speaks there, and she speaks very, very passionately and very personally. I believe it's her brother that's a police officer or was a police officer. So, I would presume that she also has very deep ties into the Chicago FOP as well. So I think she'd be a very formidable candidate.
Yeah. All right, let's go to our next topic. Let's do this one quickly because we're running out of time. But yet again, Don Harmon proves that rules are for everyone but him and his caucus. He has a lot of trouble actually following election laws and disclosure laws. And yet again, here we've got another problem here where, according to the State Board of Elections, he took over $4 million in campaign cash improperly that he never should have accepted because they were above the caps. They had informed him of this apparently way back, before he even accepted the contributions. So my question is, how did the State Board of Elections not notice this a long time ago? Why are we just talking about this in April of 2025 instead of when it happened a year ago? That said, he's been caught in this. I understand that he's got a decent excuse, and it's Illinois. He'll talk his way out of this, and sure, that's fine. We don't have to waste any time on that. I just think the point is very simple that, while Don Harmon may run a better caucus down in Springfield, over and over again, he has shown that he doesn't really care if you follow the laws or follow the rule as long as you win. He continues to have members of his caucus who are ethically challenged at a number of levels, and he hasn't punished them or done anything about it. And now here, he proves it, that he doesn't really care about following the law when it comes to election law and disclosure law. That's a culture that he's developed at this point in Springfield, in the Senate Democratic Caucus, that winning is more important than following the rules or being ethical. And I think that's a problem. So Senate Republicans are rightfully pretty angry about this. And if anybody of you have some quick thoughts on this, feel free to jump in.
Well, I don't know how quick it is, but I mean, it's another only in Illinois. I mean, it's just amazing. You can do the Supreme Court race and, a non-disclosed $10 million and two, hugely important races we just saw from the remap case. And then you close down your committee and you don't pay that fine, which I guess got down to, I don't know, 10, 100,000 or something like that. But you completely avoid the fine, because why do they not have an enforcement ability? I had a political committee. I ran for Round. I ran radio ads in Central Illinois, raised some money, and then I had a couple of donations coming in late, and so we filed. Within 30 days of a election, you have to file your report within 3 days if it's 1,000 or more. So I loaned the committee. I loaned my own committee, $1,000 twice to pay for the radio ads, but we filed that report late, so I got fined, I think, about $1,000 each. And so I appealed that fine and I got it reduced. In the meantime, I got appointed chairman of the Illinois Gaming Board, and I got the fine reduced to, I guess, $500,000, maybe $800, something like that. But I didn't have enough money in my account, so I loaned money to my committee to pay the fine like a good citizen. And I paid it, not knowing I could have just simply closed out the committee because it engaged in no activity after that election. So then Pritzker wins the election. I tender my resignation. He finally accepts it 6 months later. And then after I'm off the gaming board, the Office of the Executive Inspector General files this report and accuses me of violating the Riverboat Gaming Act because I engaged in political activity, among other things, because I had this committee, didn't shut it down immediately. Well, no, I guess that wasn't it. But because I filed an affidavit in support of my appeal of this fine, and then I loaned $200 to pay off that fine. That was political activity in their mind, and the committee did nothing. So you have that scenario in Illinois, and then Don Harmon, does a $10 million avoidance of all the rules, and there's no consequence to it. It's just unbelievable what a two-tiered system we have here in Illinois.
Donna, sometimes we get lucky and who our guests are, and I didn't connect those dots until you just said that. Obviously, we gave you kudos on air for finally vindicating yourself in that case, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we got lucked into you being on today when we talked about this topic, because the fact that they went after you as hard as they did, and yet Don Harmon gets to continue to skirt the rules, is a huge differentiation of
not once, and not twice, but 3 times, according to Rich Miller.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I think was it $4 million that's kind of in question here, and then there's a deadline of April 18th. I believe that's what I read for this to be rectified. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on, see how it plays out. But odds are probably no ramifications for this guy because he's a Democrat in the state of Illinois.
Yeah.
I thought that he was personally liable, Don, for the Supreme Court non-disclosure. I thought that even though he could close down or had no money in that campaign fund.
I don't think so, Dan. My understanding is that once you close down that committee, that's it. There's nothing they can do because it is a corporate. They're corporations, and there's usually, obviously no liability for people who are behind the corporation.
I'm mistaken because I thought that even if they tried to avoid the fine, that he was personally on the hook for it.
Should be, but should
be if you close it down without paying it. Yeah, that should be the way it is, but that's not Illinois law.
I mean, and this deal, he can't close this campaign fund down. I guess he could start a new one, but this is the second strike from the State Board of Elections, and we've always thought that they've been very fair in how they dealt with these things, and you get a pass the first time. I mean, you can say, look, I'm sorry, I'm late filing or I didn't get the the D2 filed on time or the A1 filed on time, and the first time around, they're helpful, and the second time it's like, you're not doing well. This is the third time, and we're not talking $100 or $1,000 or even $100,000. We're talking millions, $4 million.
Yeah, and in this latest case, the board had warned him, had told him not to do this, but they still did.
Right.
Yeah.
So of course, Mike Casper's going to argue that they're different committees, so it's not the third.
Well, and Casper wrote all the laws, so he knows how to make sure that he skirts on behalf of his clients. Chris, when we talk about these laws not having teeth, we just had a situation in Will County where supposedly, according to the law, if you have fines outstanding with the State Board of Elections and you're a candidate, you're not allowed to run. And yet in Will County, candidates were allowed to be put back on the ballot even though they hadn't paid their fines in time. So even that portion of the law has no teeth, right, Chris?
Well, their argument was, yeah, they got removed from the ballot, but they were township candidates, so all we did was just fill the vacancy on the ballot with the person who was removed from the ballot, which apparently you can do, which seems like a really, really, really big loophole in the law that you could just not pay your fines, get kicked off the ballot, but then you could just get put back on the ballot after the fact. That seems like a big loophole there, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, we see these loopholes all the time, and yet Democrats move no muscles at all to try to put ethics reforms in place, because it benefits them. Why should they? But until there's enough of a public outcry that actually holds them accountable, in Pritzker's State of the State and in his agenda for this year, there was nothing related to ethics. I mean, we see no interest from any of the Democrats in charge of the state to actually do something when we've got one of the most corrupt states in the country, and mostly it's Democrats who are leading the charge on that corruption. So, all right, I got to keep this moving.
Did anybody see that Illinois policy article that said that the feds have been convicting an average of one Illinois Democrat politician per week for the last 40 years?
Yeah, it's a way of life at this point. All right, let's move to our news you can use section. The whole point of this section to our viewers and to our listeners is to equip you with things you need to be aware of. You should be using these things in social media posts, in fundraising appeals, when you're knocking on doors, when you're doing what Michael did and you're talking to your neighbors as good precinct captains or precinct committeemen. That's what this section's about. So I'm going to give some information. Our guests here, our panelists, if they've got thoughts, can jump in real quick, and we'll get through this section decently fast. But there's a number of things this week you need to know about if you're watching or listening to this program. So first, we got to talk about House Bill 3762. Michael already brought it up. This is a bill, a classic Illinois bill in the Illinois House by a bunch of Democrats who I'm sure none of which have ever run a business, where literally it would require every business in Illinois to have procedures in place for if it's too hot or too cold. But when we say too hot or too cold to work, we're not talking about 100-degree heat index or below freezing temperatures. We're literally talking about, it's written in the bill, if the heat index is 80 degrees or more. Not only is your company required to give you all sorts of concessions like paid time off, paid breaks, cooling liquids, shades, whatever else. If you don't think they've done enough to take care of you and you don't want to work, you can literally just refuse to work and they can't retaliate. If it's 80 degrees or more, that's pretty much the whole summer in Chicagoland and in all of Illinois. And according to this bill, if it were to pass, you could just say, I'm not going to work. It's too hot. That's where we are in Illinois with these anti-business bills. You read this bill, it's more ridiculous every line you read. Michael, I know you were shaking your head just as much as I was when I saw this bill. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, we always complain in this state about how long road construction takes and for these projects to get done. Imagine if this passes, these roads will never get fixed.
Yeah,
and think of all the industries that, would be negatively impacted by this, like farming, construction. How are people going to get anything accomplished?
For housing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Roofing.
It's a significant problem. That's why NFIB's Noah Finley came out pretty strongly against this, just because it's a huge administrative burden. What small business, what small employer is going to be able to deal with the bureaucracy that is this? And then, of course, when the Department of Labor or unions or whoever else comes suing because you didn't do this by the letter of the law, you're going to have to settle that and pay that out of pocket. So it's another giveaway to the trial lawyers and yet another anti-business law in Illinois.
It's another example.
It's like
Coolidge, go ahead.
A woman walking down the street and she's like thinking and she's saying, should the government? And then the person says, no. The answer is no. This is typical, like Democrat, big government. What kind of laws can we come up with today? No, leave us alone.
Yeah.
To quote a book from Grover Norquist years ago. Leave us alone.
Yeah. Chris, go ahead quickly.
Look, I spent 2 summers in college working for a small business, digging holes and putting in pools. And at 82 degrees was a good day during the summer. And that was a brisk. That was chilly those summers, man. So listen, I think that the idea behind the bill would work if it was like 100 degrees at the top and like 0 degrees at the bottom. There you can make a pretty decent argument.
Yeah.
But 40 to 80 is like absurd. Because, I'm telling you, every day it's above 81 degrees and sunny, Collin. I'm calling off because you're not doing good enough to, make Butler and I's jobs a little bit easier. So, sorry, buddy. The law says I can. And if you want to tell me no, I'm going to sue your ass. So, that's what's happening here. But listen, this is absurd. All right. There's an idea here that might work, but they're doing it in the stupidest possible way. So I have I'm calling off at 81.
I think that's the tagline for Springfield. Good idea done in the stupidest possible way. All right, let's keep moving here. The next thing you should be aware of, Senate Bill 1964. This bill has not gotten a lot of attention, but even some Democrats have stood against it, and here's why. The bill would ban a number of what they call junk fees when it comes to renting. But here's the real part of this bill. It would make it so that for anybody who's delinquent on their rent, you can't charge them any more than a 1% fee, a 1% late fee. What does that mean? What's the bottom line of this? It means that if you're a renter, your only option is to raise rents to cover the fact that these delinquent tenants aren't paying because you can't charge them. So all the rest of those renters out there who actually are paying their rent on time, you're going to pay more if this bill by this Elgin Democrat is passed in order to make it easier and to reward those delinquent tenants who can't pay their bills on time, can't pay their rent on time. We talk about the cost of living in the state, and rent is too often ignored. I haven't said these words a lot, and Dan, you can back me up on this, but I'll say it. Kudos to Chris Miller, who had an op-ed in the Tribune talking about rent and how rent is a part of that cost of living equation, and how under Democrats, even rent is becoming unaffordable in this state. Cost of living is the top issue. We don't talk enough about housing and rent, and this is yet another situation where Springfield Democrats want to raise the rent for everybody to take care of their small little subset of people who can't follow the law and
make housing less available too, because I assume the creditworthy standards of the landlords will have to go up.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Next bill here you're going to be aware of is House Bill 3637. We've talked about this bill a couple times, but I'm not necessarily bringing this bill up about abortion itself, though it is about abortion pills. But here's the key line of this bill. So the whole point of this that the Democrats have passed in the House down in Springfield is they're afraid Trump's going to go to the FDA, and the FDA is going to say abortion pills aren't safe and make them outlawed. And so that's why they ran this bill. I don't really care how you feel about that, to be honest. But here's where this, again, is maybe a good idea, maybe not, but done in the stupidest possible way. They have said that anything that the U.S. Federal Drug and FDA, basically. Anything they say is unsafe, we're going to ignore that. We're going to the World Health Organization. They're going to tell us what is or isn't safe when it comes to abortion pills. And so let's say that in the future, at some point, FDA does find that an abortion pill is unsafe for women to take. It's not going to matter. Illinois is still going to say, yeah, we don't care. Still prescribe it because we only go to the WHO. We should not be looking to international organizations to decide what we do or don't give in our healthcare to our citizens in this country and this state. So whether you agree with the idea behind it or not, it was done in the stupidest possible way.
Yes. 2 words: supremacy clause. The federal government law will override anything that the state legislature comes up with. The supremacy clause. It'll be thrown out in court. It's ridiculously stupid.
That's why I don't even play an attorney on TV, because that's all above me. All right, let's go to the next one here. So J.B. Pritzker, our hypocritical governor-in-chief, this topic here is just to make sure you're pointing out, especially on social media, as you're talking about Pritzker, make sure your friends and neighbors are aware of just how giant a hypocrite J.B. Pritzker is. Because at the same time that he's attacking cuts in Washington, D.C. that are going to hurt our farmers, and he's doing all sorts of big events, that our farmers are being hurt by these cuts in Washington, D.C., at the exact same time as he's saying that, in his own budget, he's got a 31% funding cut to a super popular program that funds cover crops in Illinois. Environmentalists like that fund, farmers like that fund, and yet Pritzker's cutting it by almost a third at the same time as he's attacking Trump for making cuts that are going to hurt our farmers. Just like he was in Mexico saying that these tariffs are going to hurt our farmers, and yet he's not even lifting a finger. And I appreciate Senator Chesney calling him out on this, that he's not even raising a finger to help family farmers deal with the estate tax in this state. This is what we see over and over. Here's one more example of this. I just saw this week from the Tribune, that while Pritzker and the Democrats are complaining because the Trump administration made cuts to health services, at the same time that they're bemoaning those cuts, Pritzker made cuts, $3 million in cuts to substance abuse treatments or substance use treatments in his own budget. It's over and over. He's attacking Trump for the same exact things that he's doing in Illinois. But in Illinois, it's fiscally responsible. When Trump does it, he's killing people. All right, let's go to the next one here. Governor Gaslight, which I think I'm going to use more often when talking about J.B. Pritzker, continues to try to tell us that everything is fine at DCFS. A number of state representatives on the Republican side have come out. Patrick Sheehan, Jeff Kiker, Brad Fritz, Charlie Meyer did a press conference talking about the need for reform in DCFS. And I think everybody can agree, Republican or Democrat, we need reform at DCFS. And yet, in Pritzker's gaslighting form, everything's fine. He was asked about this at a couple press conferences, and he said there's no underreported deaths, which is a complete lie. And he said we have an annual report that comes out that looks at this. So those hundreds of kids, actually 1,200 plus kids who have died under DCF's care, Pritzker looks at those numbers once a year. And everything's fine. Don't worry about it. No problems at DCFS. Look the other way, even though the most vulnerable among us are the ones that are being hurt by the failures at DCFS under J.B. Pritzker's administration.
Well, here's my kind of rub with that. I'm just as guilty because I spent 6 years going after DCFS, and fortunately I was able to work with them out of this office. Everybody complains about DCFS, but nobody says what they want to do. There's no plan. They're this, they're that. We gave them more money to pay caseworkers and let them carry pepper spray, and we've got a program in place that they're working with the local county sheriff. If a caseworker feels threatened and they want to have a backup, that's a pilot program that hasn't gone anywhere. But of all the things, I mean, I sat in a House Senate committee, trying to figure out what to do with DCFS, and after 5 years being there, not one bill, not one suggestion came from any of that.
Dan, that sounds like a really good job for the chief executive. I think we call him the governor.
The governor.
It sounds like a really good job for him to maybe to show some leadership and do something to help the citizens of Illinois.
And I think but you have these legislators we're all appalled by what goes on, but there's no bills introduced. The Democrats haven't introduced one bill to reform DCFS not in the 6 years that I know of.
Well, I've said several times that if some candidate runs for governor in the state and actually makes DCFS a priority, that's going to put them at the top of my list for who I'm supporting for governor. All right, let's go to our next topic here. Let's talk about in your backyard here, Don. So the Springfield Airport Authority apparently is still waiting for $1 million that Pritzker's IDOT owes them 2 years later. And this is a small story. It's not a big deal. We're talking about $1 million, but it's another situation of Pritzker's absent leadership where his administration just isn't. It's dropping the ball left and right, isn't doing their jobs. This story here about how the funds were made available by the FAA. IDOT had the funds, everything was approved, and here we are over 2 years later, and the money has not been released by IDOT. These contractors haven't been paid. The airport hasn't been paid. This is just, I know it's the small potatoes, but it's just big and small stuff. Pritzker's administration just aren't doing their damn jobs.
And if Trump does something like that, he's risking passenger lives.
Yep. There you go. Exactly. All right, we're almost done here with the news you can use, but we got a couple more here. This is something that I think is interesting. So the vacancy rate in the suburbs of Chicago hit an all-time high of 32.2%. And I think that number needs some context. The national vacancy rate in 2024 was around 17.6%. So that means the suburban vacancy rate is almost double what the national rate is. Chicago, of course, has a decently high vacancy rate, but nothing like the suburbs. And over again, I say this, that the suburbs, the collar counties, are who get screwed the most. We spend the most in tax dollars and see the least back for those tax dollars. Nobody seems to care about the suburbs. And here we go is another serious problem. A third of our office space in the suburbs is vacant. And we talk about how there's a lack of job growth in this state. There's a lack of businesses that are growing, that are coming into Illinois, that are bringing opportunity, creating jobs, and that has directly created this problem. When you look at office use, employment, Lane's going to bring up a graph on screen. Chicago was the second worst. We had a decline while every other market improved and increased. We've talked repeatedly over the lack of job growth in this state. One of the areas that's not talked about and where that has an impact is in the vacancy rate, is in actually seeing things happening in our communities, in these spaces. That brings vitality to the community. It brings opportunity. It brings revenue to those communities. This is a big problem when a third of your suburban offices are vacant. I know that's a little bit in the weeds, but again, we're trying to give you information you can use as our viewers, as our listeners. And that's another situation where you see a problem in Chicago and Chicagoland area where our anti-business policies in the state, led by Democrats, are hurting all of our communities. All right, couple more. If you're a Chicago resident, you are paying twice as much for your gas and your utilities as you were last year. The increase year over year is 104% in April. In terms of what you're paying for gas, it's yet another situation where the policies by Democrats in Chicago and Illinois, which are all Democrat-led, are leading to an increase in your cost of living. This is for residents. This is for businesses. That's a massive increase in what you're paying for gas while you're heating your workplace or heating your residence. Cost of living is the big issue. All right, last thing, and I know, Chris, you're going to have thoughts on this, but yet again, we're seeing a situation where a Democrat claims to support unions and yet blocks unionization. We've seen Chris Welch do this for years down in Springfield. Now we see the Cook County State's Attorney is doing it, where she promised that she would support unionization in her office and is now blocking it. This is yet again a situation where Democrats talk good to unions. We're here for you in unions. And yet Belvedere still sits empty despite Pritzker being pro-union. We see Chris Welch being a complete hypocrite on this. And now we're seeing Eileen O'Neill Burke do it in the Cook County State's Attorney's office.
Don't forget, Madigan and Quinn both did it in their like 2012 or something like that, when their staff wanted to unionize.
Yeah.
And they passed a special bill saying they couldn't.
Rules for thee, not for me.
Yep.
My understanding, and I'm just going based off the press release from Burke's office, is that this is like there's like a legal requirement or a legal precedent that they had to file this with the courts to block the. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just getting the full story out there.
I read that too.
Yeah, if they are trying to block it for like nefarious purposes, I think it's bad. because it just makes you look like a hypocrite, like Collin said. At the same time, I don't think it really brings us anything good by attacking the state attorney of Cook County, because all it does is give Toni Preckwinkle ammunition in 4 years or 3 years when she wants to take her out again and put somebody worse in there. That's just the opinion of this commentator.
Yeah, well, when Democrats are hypocrites, we're going to call them out for it. All right, final segment. Let's have some fun with this. Anybody have any OGs or clowns of the week they want to call out? Ideally in politics, ideally in Illinois, but let's be real, there are no rules. So who do you want to call out, either give them praise or give them some scorn for the week? What do you guys got? Come on, you got to have some good.
I'll go with for praise, Tom Homan. I mean, the great job they have done in closing the border and such record speed, and and allowing Trump to be able to say that Biden said we needed legislation to close the border, but it shows that we just needed a different president. And Tom Homan's the guy who made. And I don't know if you've ever met him. You probably have. He is an amazing guy. But nationally, but locally, statewide, Dan Brady, winning the mayor's race. We lost, four mayors in that a terrible election Tuesday. Mike Trope of Quincy, good Republican mayors, Mike Tomes, Rock Island, Keith Pekow, and then Richard Irvin in Aurora. And yet Dan somehow in purple Bloomington prevailed. And so I say, hats off to Dan. Then do we do the clown now, or do we
go for it? Yeah.
My clown would be Don Harmon, not surprisingly, for claiming the high ground and moral superiority, and big Democrat leader, and you elect the guy who can elect justices of the Illinois Supreme Court, and then he obviously he's a super legislator, and yet he violates the laws that he writes.
It's a well-earned,
egregiously.
Yeah, that's a well-earned clown nomination for sure. Who else has got thoughts?
I've got a quick one, just a OG and clown of the week. Pretty basic. OG, Scott Bessent, or Besson, however you pronounce it, our new Treasury Secretary. The podcast he did with Tucker Carlson this week. I know all watchers of this is the only podcast most Smoke-Filled Room people watch is the Smoke-Filled Room, but there's other podcasts. One of them I recommend is Tucker Carlson's, and he interviewed him. And if you really want to understand what is going on behind the mentality of Trump and these tariffs, listen to that podcast. It's a long one, but it's worth it, trust me. And kind of the week, JB Jellybelly Pritzker, for continuing to believe the delusion that he is presidential material and timber. He is not.
You're not wrong there. What else you guys got?
I got to give a clown of the week to Sean Casten for the stunt that he's pulling this weekend. I'm sure he'll be welcomed, with open arms in Carterville, where all the Republicans are, and Dixon, Illinois. I mean, geez, coming down from Chicago and telling us, how we need to do things down here. I think it should be the other way around. Maybe send me and Dan up to Chicago and we'll straighten them out.
Yeah. Sean Casten's not from Chicago.
Either way, Michael was showing some fire, Chris. Come on, you could learn a little bit from him. Show some passion. What else you guys got? Dan, I know you were jumping in.
OG of the week, I'm going to go with TCH, Tara Costa Howard, for her homeschool bill that she's pushed and the way that she's.
Hold on. You said OG, you meant clown, right?
I'm sorry, clown of the week. Clown. Whoa, sorry.
We knew what you meant, Dan.
Spinning ahead.
I don't want someone taking you out of context, so I fixed
it. Please erase that.
Strongest shoulder.
That'll be on my governor's race. So Phil.
Yeah, so she's mine as well. One of my clowns of the week. The way she's handled it. Michael brought it up. I mean, it's clearly just poking people in the eye, trying to make enemies here, but at the same time, crying foul and trying to play the that she's the victim here, and people are being so mean to me, and it's like, these Democrats, they'll do anything. I mean, they are literally burning Teslas and threatening violence, but if you dare say we don't like your legislation, you've hurt my feelings.
I'm speaking here. Do you want me to answer the question, or do you want to speak over me, Collin?
Both. Yeah,
that's Tara Costa. I mean, that's Tara Costa Howard's answer to any criticism. And for the OG, OG of the week, I want to go to the Republicans in the House that are standing strong and calling out the Democrats on all of this crappy legislation. It's working. They're triggered. They're fracturing. I think this is going to lead to a very interesting budget negotiations. It was really bad last year. I think it's going to be worse this year. So keep it up, Republicans. Stick it to them every time you can.
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly love to see the fight of the Republicans. It's been more than we've seen in a long time.
So I got two clowns of the week. First clown of the week is the guy at my annual town hall meeting who moved to raise the moderator's fee from $50 to $100 for some reason. Apparently, this has been happening all over the place, that Democrats are showing up to township annual meetings and trying to raise the moderator fee and get their guy in there. I don't understand why they're doing this, but the motion lost, and these people didn't get their person in there to be moderator. So it was just kind of a stupid motion to get an extra $50 for somebody. So if you tried to raise the moderator fee at your town hall meeting this week, you are the clown of the week, specifically the guy in Bremen Township who did it. And the second clown of the week are the Chicago White Sox, 8-game losing streak. My life is a living hell for many reasons, one of which is the Chicago White Sox. We were 2-2 after 4 games of the season, and I'm like, we're back. We're so back. We're going to be mediocre this year. Maybe we'll just be bad. No, every day it's another nightmare. Last night, on Wednesday night, Mike Talkman's rounding third to tying run. He blows out his hamstring. How does that happen in my life? So the Chicago White Sox, you are the clown of the week.
So close to being above 500.
All right, some OGs and clowns on my end. Don DeWitt, OG, is pushing forward a bill, Senate Bill 253, which I love, simply because all the time Republicans are like, cut taxes, but we don't really give specific instances. Don DeWitt with this bill, I think it's awesome. It's in Illinois statute, consumers who pay for medically required equipment in their vehicle, if you buy the vehicle whole with that equipment, you only pay the 1% tax. But if you put the equipment on separately, you only pay that 1% tax. But if you buy it with the vehicle, you pay the full sales tax, the full 6.25. And so this is a specific instance where he said, hey, we should be not charging that higher sales tax rate when it's medically required equipment. I love instances like this where Republicans find key issues that you couldn't be against if you're a Democrat, and it's lowering that tax impact. Sure, is this tiny? Of course it is. But instead of just saying lower taxes, actually finding specific instances that even Democrats couldn't oppose. I love that. It's a great example. So kudos to Don DeWitt. On the clown side, we've done this before. We've talked about how issues in some of our public schools, I tend to bring these up on my clowns, and I got to do it here because a teacher in Naperville, right as Tara Costa Howard is talking about how homeschoolers are the problem, we have yet again, and kudos to Ginny Ives who called this out, a second sex abuse arrest of a public school teacher in DuPage County in less than 3 weeks. I like to name names when they're these people because they deserve to be named. William Schaub of LaGrange, for grooming and criminal sexual abuse of a minor. Absolute clown of the century for crap like that. We brought up another person in the past, Walter Moist, who ran for school district in 155 up in Crystal Lake. Well, last week, while he was on the ballot for election, where he got blown out, thank God, he violated his order of protection and was arrested for that. Court records show. So when we call some of these people out, there's a reason for it. There are bad actors on the ballot. Literally the week he was on the ballot, he violated his order of protection, and he was running for school board. Anastasia Murray is also a clown of the week because she replied to a constituent. I'm looking at it right now. Someone posted this, and thank you for posting it. She replied to a constituent that, oh, I see you're a flat earther, 2-gender theory subscriber. So basically, if you believe that we have 2 genders, you are a flat earther, according to Anastasia Murray, which gets her on my clown of the week list for sure.
Between 70 and 80% of the population understand that there are 2 genders, by the way, according to
But you're a flat earther.
A lot of flat earthers out there.
Yeah. Apparently. Sheesh. Also on my list, because I got to do it, Rich Miller of Capital Facts. So he finally posted one of our episodes last week, but described it as a massive wine fest about the Illinois Republican Party. Now, we spent an hour and a half dissecting how we lost, taking responsibility for it, and talking about the ways that we needed to improve to go out and win. And he decided to be a dick and just call it a massive wine fest. So you know what? You're my clown then, Rich, if you're going to play that game. While he was overtly trying to prop up Aaron Del Mar, which you can tell what he's trying to do there, and also spelling my name wrong. So you're going to run a blog, maybe learn how to spell. All right, I'll move on from that one. Next, just a couple more here. The Chicago City Council. Listen, I have said from the beginning that if you rioted on January 6th, you deserve to be held accountable. We are the law and order party. But here's the problem I have is the Chicago City Council moved forward to block anyone who was involved in January 6th from holding any city jobs. This is Democrats in Chicago who say that everyone should get a second chance. You're a murderer, you're a rapist, you did horrible things, you deserve a second chance. But the only people in their minds who don't deserve a second chance are those who were involved in January 6th. To me, that is the height of hypocrisy and basically pretty ridiculous. All right, last thing. Go ahead.
They weren't violent enough.
I guess. Sheesh. All right, last thing, I'll do this quick, but Senate Bill 2258, Robert Peters, I'm just sick and tired of reading these descriptions from these Democrats on these bills where they talk about how it's going to do all these amazing things. So this is a bill that supposedly would lower your energy costs and create jobs, and it's going to have a project labor agreement, so it's going to create lots of labor jobs. It's going to lower your utility bills and make us more green, and they do this a lot, especially with green bills or green energy bills, where they list like it's going to do all of these things and ignore the fact that no, it's actually going to cost. This bill would require energy companies, electric companies, gas companies in Illinois to run pilot programs for thermal energy network projects. What it doesn't talk about is where that money is going to come from. Well, if you're going to require them to run these pilots, they're going to have to charge their ratepayers to run these pilots. And yet this press release is jobs and lower utilities and blah, 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 all the typical BS. I'm sick and tired of it, so Robert Peters gets on my list for being Clown of the Week. He's not the only one who does it, but he's the straw that broke the camel's back for me. All right, that's it. Closing thoughts. Everybody brought the heat, so let's start with my team first and let our guests go last. Chris, your final thoughts for the week.
So it's Masters weekend, so I encourage all political operatives across the state to sit down and watch some golf this weekend. Enjoy your life a little bit. Don't watch the White Sox. It'll be much more satisfying to watch golf rather than watch the White Sox. And just everyone have a good weekend. It's Palm Sunday. If you go to church, enjoy your Palm Sunday, and have a wonderful weekend.
Michael?
I was just going to say, we ran through a pretty long list of how crazy and ignorant some of these Democrats are. And, take notes, make a plan, because 2026 will be here before we know it. And a lot of opportunities out there, but it's up to us to put in the work and take advantage of them.
Yeah, I agree. Dan, your final thoughts for the week. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It's always great. Conversations, stimulating, sometimes infuriating.
We do our best to make you feel emotions, whether good or bad.
He said,
oh, that's great. Thanks. If you're thinking about running for office, now's the time. Petitions are going to be here before you know it. And if this is something that you're interested in, you should be expressing that interest to your other elected officials, people in your district. So don't get complacent. Start thinking about it now. You've got time. We need to start rounding up candidates for next November.
Yeah, sadly, you say get complacent. I think we're already there, so let's stop being complacent. But here, I echo your thoughts. Mike, thanks for being with us this week. Your final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm stealing both a lot of the things that were already said. The Masters to me is just such a cathartic, great, it's almost like meditation on the year. March Madness is over. Football's way behind us. Baseball's just getting started, but the Masters is the Masters. It's just so wonderful. And coinciding with Palm Sunday, of course, we have, Resurrection Sunday, Easter happening the week after that. So everyone have a wonderful, happy Easter. But yes, what Dan said is so true. Municipals are behind us. The midterm elections aren't until a year from November. If you're thinking about running, or if you know somebody who is going to be an awesome candidate and you want to get involved, you just want to start doing something of substance and that can make a difference in this state, get involved now. Get involved in your local Republican Party. Find where they meet, find when they meet, and show up. And if you don't like the people there, or if you don't think that they're doing anything, you can change that. You can start getting involved. It's all volunteers. We're always looking for fresh blood. Get involved. Now's the time to do it. Let's turn the state purple and then red.
I like it, Mike. Don, final word for the week.
And I've been looking for a long time for the wheels on the Democrat machine in Illinois to come off. It seems like all the ingredients are there. We have, a governor who's, more interested in running for president than governing Illinois, whose job is going to be made way more difficult now that the COVID money has run out and DC is not going to bail out Illinois. We have a mayor in Chicago with the lowest approval ratings ever. Democrats have been pushing woke legislation that does not reflect the will of the majority of Illinoisans for a long time, and now they're going after homeschoolers. You've got the extreme environmentalists, trying to shut down our power plants, and at the same time, Pritzker's trying to promote, data centers here, and so you've got a natural. Adversaries in the unions, the trade unions, and against the extreme environmentalists. At some point the wheels are going to come off. And maybe Durbin doesn't run too. I mean, all the ingredients are there for the Democrat machine to start failing. I sure as hell hope we see it sooner or later.
And then take advantage of the opportunity, right? That's going to be key. All right, well, let's close down this episode. I want to leave you with something as our viewers, as our listeners, a piece of good news. We're number one in something. I don't know if you know this, but Illinois has the number one number of White Castles per any state in the entire country. We are actually number one at something. So here,
that's right.
Illinois, you can't afford to live here, but at least you have diarrhea. So, that's great. So something to look forward to, I guess. But hey, this is closing down our 99th episode. Next week, we're going to have a special episode where we're going to dive deep into why is it sometimes as Republicans, or a lot of times, we can't get along, and how can we start to work together. I think it's going to be a really good debate. It's either going to go awesome or it's going to go horribly, but you're going to be able to watch it as it happens. So please come back next week to enjoy that discussion. In the meantime, have a good week. We will catch you next week on the Smoke-Filled Room.